quorum being present, the committee will come to order for the purposes of conducting this hearing on the impact of concussions on high school athletics and athletes. Welcome to the witnesses that will be testifying this morning. Thank you for your time and your expertise. We're kind of jamming this hearing. When we planned this hearing, we didn't have a joint session of Congress at 11 o'clock with the President of Mexico. And so we've moved the time up, and that interferes into the caucuses of both parties. So I want to thank Mr. Klein for being here and the other members that are here. And but we felt rescheduling was going to make it more difficult, so we wanted to get this hearing on the record. We think it's a very important matter for this committee. Today we will examine how concussions experienced by high school athletes on the playing field are impacting their academic well-being and their quality of life. We will also learn more about schools and medical community can provide appropriate management and support these young student athletes. One of our committee's key priorities has been looking at how we can keep students safe and protected in school. This is our first hearing looking into what happens on the athletic field where many school injuries occur. Last year, Congressman Andrews, Congresswoman Bono Mack, and I asked the Government Accountability Office to look into concussions in high school athletics after several professional athletes suffered debilitating and news-making head injuries diagnosed as concussions. It was clear to us that if the NFL was paying attention to concussions at the professional level, we should be doing the same at the high school level, when students' bodies and minds are still growing and therefore somewhat more vulnerable. Today, the GAO will share the findings of their report. We will hear about the incidence of concussions in high school sports and what federal programs exist to help prevent these catastrophic injuries from sidelining students. This is the first comprehensive look at what is being done to prevent and manage these injuries. When a student suffers a concussion, serious repercussions can occur both on the field and in the classroom. On the playing field, concussions can pose significant health risks to students. High school athletes are at greater risk of sports-related concussions than college or professional athletes because of their younger brains are more susceptible to injury. In the last school year alone, 400,000 concussions were reported in high school athletics. And this could also be a low estimate. Studies show that the prevalence of sports-related concussions is much higher than reported. A concussion, unlike a sprain or a broken bone, is not always easily detected. 90% of concussions occur without a loss of consciousness. Concussions can cause a range of symptoms, from altered mental status to physical symptoms such as headaches or dizziness to emotional changes like irritability and difficulty in sleeping. The number and types of symptoms may vary in each person, but unless a student takes time off from the field after suffering a concussion, he or she may be prolonging their recovery and the success in school may suffer. Unfortunately, the symptoms of concussions are not only difficult to detect, but they are not always taken seriously. In the sports injury community, there is a saying, when in doubt, sit it out. But recent studies show that more than half the high school girls volleyball and boys basketball and baseball players who suffered concussions returned to play too soon. This is a problem that isn't limited to student athletes. College and professional athletes also feel the pressure to compete and stay in the game. The pressure to play is overriding medical concerns and potentially the student's academic and health future. Failing to sit it out after concussions can negatively affect students in the classroom. One of our witnesses will tell us that almost 90% of girls recovering from concussion reported their symptoms worsened by trying to focus on schoolwork. Any parent can tell us that participating in sports doesn't just get their kids up and moving. It gives them skills that will come in handy in school, on the job, and throughout their lives. Our goal today is to make sure that our kids can continue to participate in sports safely and to continue to reap the benefits both on and off the field. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about what schools can be doing to better help support high school athletics and testimony on the effects of concussion on student achievement. With that, I'd like now to recognize the senior Republican this morning, Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, all. Welcome to our witnesses. We're here this morning to discuss research recently conducted by the Government Accountability Office into concussions among high school athletes. The findings of the GAO will be illuminated by experts in the field and individuals who have firsthand experience with this type of injury. Concussions are functional traumatic brain injuries suffered as a result of force For instance, they could be caused by a collision of the head or a blow to the body. Although the federal government is not responsible for the treatment or tracking of this type of injury, concussions are of interest to this committee because of their implications to students. Hearings such as this provide an opportunity to shine a spotlight on the issues dealt with by states and local communities and highlight the resources and best practices available to help students, parents, coaches, and school leaders prevent these injuries and respond appropriately when they do occur. Research in this area is ongoing, but we know concussions among high school athletes have drawn increasing attention in recent years. One reason is because younger people appear to be more vulnerable to this type of injury than adults. Recent research indicates high school athletes with recent or repeated concussions have difficulty concentrating, lower attendance rates, and significantly lower cumulative grade point averages than high school athletes with no history of concussion. In other words, this affects not just student health, but also academics. As with many dangers to our children, prevention is the best medicine. That's why we'll hear today about education programs and resources designed to help prevent concussions in student athletes. We'll also hear about programs and guidance for coaches, administrators, parents, and medical personnel that address what to do when a concussion occurs or is suspected, including best practices for determining when athletes can most safely return to the field of play. I want to thank the witnesses for being here to discuss this topic and help bring attention to the steps student athletes and the adults who supervise them can take to prevent and respond to this type of injury. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like now to introduce our panel of witnesses. Gerald Joya is the Director of Neurophysiology at Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C. Dr. Joya oversees a pediatric neurophysiology program and safe concussion outcome recovery and education program at Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C. Dr. Joya is internationally recognized as an expert in youth concussions. His concussion management guidelines for youth athletes, as recently adopted by International Conference of Concussions in Sports, combining his expertise with his experience as a school psychologist at Howard County Public Schools. Dr. Joya helped the Center on Disease Control develop in-school concussion materials released this month. Dr. Joya is expected to discuss the proper concussion management in the high school setting. Michelle Pelton is a former high school athlete from Fall River, Massachusetts. Michelle Pelton suffers from cumulative effects of concussions she sustained during her adolescence, 5 of which occurred while participating in softball and basketball at her school. After sustaining 3 concussions in a row in her senior year, Michelle retired from sports and sought proper treatment. She managed to graduate from Denman Regional Vocational High School in support of a 504 plan, but she lost her opportunity to attend college with a scholarship and continues to struggle with work and academics. Michelle has helped improve concussion safety for other high school athletes and recently received local community service award for her efforts. Linda Cohn is the Director of Health Care Issues at the Government Accountability Office and is the lead investigation into concussions in high school sports. She will present findings of the incident rates of concussions among high school athletes and the characteristics and state laws and athletic association guidelines that are in place to protect student athletes from these injuries. Michael Monticelli serves as the athletic director and head varsity football coach at Caledonia Mumford Central School. During the course of his career, Mr. Monticelli has led his team to 5 state championships many times, including this past season, received many awards for his coaching from the state of New York. After coaching high school sports for over 30 years, Mr. Monticelli instituted comprehensive concussion management guidelines at his school, and his district established the similar standards. James C. Schmutz is the Director of American Sports Education Program. Mr. Schmutz joined Human Kinetics Publishing as Executive Director of the American Sports Education Division in March 2009. Previously, he worked for the Special Olympics for 19 years, including roles in Virginia and the District of Columbia, where he oversaw coach and volunteer recruitment and training. He has served as a volunteer youth sport coach for soccer, hockey, basketball, baseball. Jim utilizes his experience and knowledge to advance this mission and make sports safer and more enjoyable and more valuable to athletes by developing educational program and resources for coaches, administrators, and parents and officials. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for your time and your expertise, as I said earlier. And Mr. Joya, we're going to begin with you. When you start, a green light will go on in those little boxes in front of you. When you have a minute left, which will be about 4 minutes into your testimony, an orange light will go on, and then a red light when we would ask you to try and summarize and finish your testimony. And so, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning to you and to the members of the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today about this very important topic, the academic effects of sport-related concussion in our youth. Again, my name is Dr. Jerry Joya. I serve as the Chief of the Division of Pediatric Neuropsychology at Children's National Medical Center and run a very active concussion program here in the district. I'm also the national leader of the mild traumatic brain injury care system of the Sarah Jane Brain Foundation, which has written an extensive national plan for universal care for children with traumatic brain injuries, the PABI plan, which I believe you have. As we know, much attention has been previously directed toward concussion in football and at the professional and collegiate levels. Well, what we're going to talk about today is moving away from that tip of the iceberg. We focus on the larger problem today, which is concussion in the student athlete in youth sports and the effect of that brain injury on academic learning and performance. We know that learning in school is the child's job, and that job is impaired after a concussion. Concussions are a serious matter, and it's not simply a football matter. Concussions occur in all sports, and let's watch a quick video just to demonstrate that. That's hit number one. Here's our problem. He plays the next day. So this is a clip of 2 hits, 2 injuries, 2 concussions. The second injury was likely made much worse because the first was not recognized. Now, the athlete, when you talk with him, actually reported symptoms, but he didn't know what to do with them, and no one recognized them on the ice. So this is our first big problem, poor recognition of the injury. It highlights our need to improve that identification much more acutely. As a result of this injury, it took the student athlete a month to recover rather than a much shorter period of time had we identified it early. We also have in our presence today a guest, 14-year-old Sarah Rainey of Alexandria, Virginia, who is currently recovering from a concussion sustained in April playing soccer, where poor recognition of the injury contributed to her lengthy recovery. And let me tell you, I've provided written testimony, but if you only have limited time, read Sarah's testimony, not mine. I think it's much more effective. So what is a concussion? What happens to the student athlete's brain when hit? A concussion is a brain injury. It's a force to the head and brain that results in electrical and chemical changes, and it changes that brain's biological software. It produces a whole host of signs and symptoms, physical, cognitive, emotional, and disrupts sleep. And with our next slide here, we're going to take a look because what we see in this next slide is we know that the time to recovery from brain injury varies widely from months, weeks to months, and for some years and beyond. And this slide that's coming up shows the wide range of time to recover of a group of high school athletes. And the brain is impaired during this time. If the slide doesn't come up, that's fine. The point is that it took a long period of time for these kids to recover. And one of the aspects of that slide actually shows us that those who have sustained more than one concussion took longer to recover. Now, how does this brain injury then affect the academic functioning? Well, if you take this combination of symptoms, cognitive, emotional, physical, it clearly affects that individual's ability to learn and to remember, and decreases their tolerance for performance. So that new learning is impaired. They cannot perform reading, math, and writing effectively. They're slowed down. Their access to their knowledge and information at tests is also a problem. We also know that schoolwork places a significant demand on the brain's impaired software, and that the symptoms worsen as they try to think and learn. So this is called cognitive exertion, and it worsens symptoms as you try to mentally concentrate. And we believe that this becomes a major problem, and if you overexert for too long, then it can delay recovery. This next slide that you see here is some recent research that we have done that shows that 80 to 90% of the students in this study in our clinic experience these negative effects in the first month of injury, and about half of them continue to have those problems well into a month and a half. So learning is impaired through this entire time. Well, how big is the academic impairment following concussion? Well, we don't know that at this point. What we know is that most of our student athletes, certainly as this sample shows, have impairment over a period of time lasting a month or longer. What we don't know is the extent of the long-term problems yet. That's something that we need to understand. And what we cannot predict is who that individual will be that'll have the short to medium-term problem and the long-term problem. So what we've got to do here is to work toward changing this. School systems must be active partners to assist the students' recovery, but currently schools are not prepared for this. So they are not aware when students come back into their presence, and we need to improve that medical to school communication linkage. We also need to train our school staff to understand and recognize concussion-related learning problems and what to do about them. The good news is we're beginning to develop these materials to address these problems. We have materials such as an ACE care plan, which is part of the CDC's Physician's Toolkit that we use regularly to guide students' reentry, and the new CDC Toolkit heads up to schools Know Your Concussion ABCs, which is actually being released today, as we understand, on the CDC website, with excellent materials for school nurses, counselors, psychologists, teachers, and parents. Also in Colorado and in Oregon, they've been developing school concussion management programs. So our challenge is to implement, as a nation, supports for students with brain injuries universally, and to study the most effective ways to help them and to reduce these problems, minimize the negative academic outcomes. So let me just sum up now by saying that youth participation in sports is essential. It is essential to their development. It's a positive thing. But concussions in youth and high school sports are significant with direct effects on their academic performance. Learning in school is the child's job, and that job is impaired after the injury. We must better prevent, identify acutely, and treat early, communicate between the medical, school, and athletic health systems, and effectively return students back to school appropriately. To do so, we need a universally accessible care system that really integrates all these key components together for student athletes with these injuries, but also for all students with acquired brain injuries. The PABI plan is something that we have developed, a set of professionals across the country to put this in place, and I believe you all have a copy of that. And we really look forward to collaborative efforts between the groups, the Sarah Jane Brain Foundation, the CDC, NIH, Departments of Education, sports, and medical groups to develop this appropriate universal evidence-based system of care. I'd also like to acknowledge the 14 members of a committee who are co-sponsors of this concurrent Resolution 198. Michael Castle, Yvette Clark, Joe Courtney, Marcia Fudge, Raul Grijalva, Maisie Hirono, Rush Holt, Dale Kildee, Dave Loebsack, Donald Payne, Robert Scott, Carol Shea Porter, Dina Titus, and David Wu, as we're really looking now to change the system. I thank you for your attention, for your invitation, and I look forward to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Michelle, welcome to the committee. We look forward to your testimony. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good morning. First, I would like to thank you for inviting me here today. This is a great honor to be here to talk about the effects of a concussion. When I was told about this opportunity, I quickly agreed because I want to make a difference and help athletes be aware of what could happen. Everyone thinks that something like this would never happen to them. I thought the same thing, but I'm a perfect example. I'm here today to share with you my traumatic story on how much concussions have affected me and my life. I played my first basketball game when I was just 7 years old and instantly fell in love with the sport. I was even named Rookie of the Year. That following spring, I had the opportunity to fall in love with softball as well. My life revolved around sports. In junior high school, my basketball coach loved how aggressive I was, but maybe I was too aggressive. A girl from the other team and I collided while fighting for the ball. We both fell to the ground. All I thought was, ouch, my head, and just got up and continued to play. Even though we both fell to the ground holding our heads, coaches, refs, nor parents had thought anything of it. That was the start of my series of 7 concussions over the next 4 years. The day following my collision, I stood home from school due to an unbearable headache. I then passed out and my mother called 911. At the emergency room, they in fact did diagnose me with a concussion and said I could return to play in 2 weeks or when my symptoms were gone. As with any athlete, I convinced my parents that after 2 weeks I was symptom-free. That was a big lie. I was still having headaches, but I thought I was fine to go back to play. After all, it was just a headache. And as fate would have it, the first game I returned to, I collided with a girl again, this time leaving me hospitalized with a second concussion. At the hospital, I did not know where I was, what happened, or even what school I attended. I had no idea how my life would change because of this concussion. In the days, weeks, and months to come, my daily life changed. Daily headaches, dizziness, memory loss, lack of concentration, depression are just a few of the symptoms that were part of my everyday life. School would never be the same, and no more sports. I had the worst case of post-concussion syndrome that my pediatrician had ever seen. This would lead to a series of specialists that I would see over the next several years. I went to the head trauma clinic at Boston Children's Hospital several times for evaluations and recommendations. I also saw a chiropractor, went for weekly acupuncture, had a speech therapist, massage therapy, and a therapist, all to help me learn to live with what had happened. 2 weeks is definitely not enough time to let your brain rest and recover. I learned this at my first visit with Dr. Neil McGrath from the Sports Concussion New England Clinic. During the visit, I took the impact test, and my scores showed that I was nowhere near ready to go back to play. At first, I resented Dr. McGrath because he was taking away something that I loved. However, I know now the risks involved with not taking care of your brain. The impact test can show something that no X-ray, CT scan, or MRI can. During my high school years, I excelled in basketball and even more so in softball. I had college coaches looking at me in softball when I was only a sophomore. I couldn't wait for my senior year. However, it was nothing like how I had imagined it. I received 5 concussions during my high school years that left me without half of my senior year, including softball. For the last 5 months of my senior year, I was home tutored. Each morning was a struggle to get up and face the day. The girl that fell in love with basketball when she was only 7 dreaded going to practice every day. I had headaches, lack of concentration, mood swings, depression, and I just did not care about anything. I lost the pride and the joy of finally being a senior and captain on my softball team. If I had played, I would have been named Female Athlete of the Year. While all my classmates were involved in senior activities, I was home depressed and in constant pain, and life had become a blur. I wasn't involved in any senior activities or the fun of just being a senior. I lost potential 4-year scholarships to play the sport I love. My dreams were crushed. I cannot even begin to explain the daily struggle my life has become and everything I have lost because of my concussions. No one can see my injury, but it's there. I know I have learned to overcome and compensate for my injuries because I am so determined to keep as many of my dreams in my life as possible, but not without a tremendous price. Every day I endure memory loss, lack of concentration, depression, slow processing speed, and cognitive effects that make my everyday life a battle. Yes, I have overcome many obstacles and accomplished a lot considering my injuries, but no one but me truly understands what it is like to live every day like this. If I can prevent even one person from experiencing what has happened to me, then my trip here was a huge success. Concussions have been called the invisible injury. From my brief story, I hope this committee realizes the long-term effects of concussions are not invisible. Thank you for your time today and for careful consideration on this very important public health issue. It can and will impact a lot of athletes. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for your testimony. I want to thank your mother and your stepfather for also being here at this hearing. Thank you. And I'd like to recognize Sarah Rainey. Sarah, would you just raise your hand so the members of the committee can see who you are? Her testimony is in our packets, and as Dr. Joya made the point of, it's certainly worth the members reading. I'd like to also move that without objection, the committee is joined today by Congressman Pascrell from New Jersey, who has been a leader in the efforts to treat and prevent concussions in school-aged children. He founded the Congressional Brain Injury Task Force in 2001 and has introduced H.R. 1347, the Concussion Treatment and Care Tools Contact Act, providing for, among other things, the establishment and implementation of concussion management guidelines for school-aged children. Mr. Passarello, we're pleased to have you here. You don't have to sit there. You can come join one side or the other. Yeah, you're always on the outside there. So I just say that for the witnesses because he'll be joining us in the questions later on. But thank you for joining us. And I don't know if Congresswoman Bono Mack will be joining us, but I extend the same request for her to sit with the committee and participate in the questioning. And Dr. Cohn, we'll come to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Miller, Ranking Member Klein, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me here today to talk about concussions in high school sports. Because it can be a very serious injury, you asked us what is known about the occurrence of concussion among high school athletes while playing or practicing competitive sports and about activities addressing the issue. In terms of the first question, the frequency of occurrence, we found that the available information cannot provide an overall national estimate of how often concussion occurs, and that, moreover, the figures that are available likely underestimate the magnitude. We identified 3 sources of information that each capture one piece of the story. For example, a database at the Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, monitors the occurrence of injuries, including concussion, at a sample of 100 high schools. But it only obtained, the figures they've published from that database only cover 9 sports, not all sports. Another database we identified is sponsored by the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and that captures information from people who present with injuries at emergency rooms. But not everybody with a suspected concussion goes to an emergency room. It's not that the numbers are wrong, it's just that it's not the full picture. And although it's useful to know how often concussion occurs among high school athletes, the goal isn't to get a perfect number. After all, if you're a parent and it's your child, there's really only one number that counts. The other part of the issue is what to do when it happens, and we found activities targeted to this issue at both national and state levels. At the federal level, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the Department of Health and Human Services sponsors the primary educational initiative that is specifically directed at preventing concussion in high school sports. And you heard it referenced before. It's called Heads Up Concussion in High School Sports. It provides educational materials for coaches, athletic trainers and directors, parents, and athletes. The program was initially rolled out in 2005, and the agency continues to update the materials. At the state level, 3 states were identified to us as being key in terms of having passed legislation specific to concussion management in school sports: Oregon, Texas, and Washington. All 3 state laws contain provisions regarding concussion education and also provisions regarding how quickly athletes can return to play after a suspected concussion, although the laws do vary. For example, in terms of concussion education, Oregon targets the coaches, Washington targets the coaches, athletes, and parents, and Texas targets coaches, trainers, physicians who work with the teams, athletes, and directors of the marching band. All 3 states require that an athlete returning to play be cleared in writing by some type of health professional. We also identified 5 sets of voluntary guidelines that covered nationwide guidelines that address the management of concussion in sports. All 5 guidelines are similar in that they recommend an athlete with a suspected concussion be monitored on the sidelines and return to play gradually. Only one of the guidelines, that from the National Federation of State High School Associations, specifically targets high school sports. And that guideline recommends a gradual increase in both physical and mental activity. So for example, the athlete may be on an abbreviated school day, progress to a full school day, and then increasingly engage in physical activity. When we looked at these various activities across CDC, the state laws, the guidelines, I personally was struck by how many people have the potential to observe the effects of a concussion in a high school athlete, as the graphic illustrates. Certainly the coaches and trainers are there, but so are the teammates, the parents, the teachers who may notice something a day after an injury, the school nurse, the family physician, the emergency room physician who may examine the athlete. There's lots of people around these kids, and everybody has an opportunity to contribute to making competitive sports as safe as they can be. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Coach Monticelli, you're up.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and other distinguished members of the House Education and Labor Committee. Thank you for inviting me to speak on concussion management and how it is integrated into our district procedure. In 2006, in an athletic directors conference, I sat in on a workshop that briefed us on concussion management program Impact. Being in the coaching business for close to 40 years and a witness to these types of injuries, this program and those like it had my attention. After taking this information back to our district superintendent, it was an easy sale. Any program or policy that would reduce injury risk to our student athletes is a priority for us. We were able within our school schedule to not only test our student athletes, but all our middle school and high school students. Each student is tested every other year. Our district, Caledonia Mumford Central School, felt that an injury that can affect cognitive functions can happen to any of our students at home, to and from school, gym class, car accidents, etc. Coverage for our total middle school and high school student population, and not just athletes, is important. We tested grades 6, 8, and 10 this spring. For me personally as a coach, it has taken the guesswork out of determining when a player is ready to return to action after a concussion. In the past, the return to play was based more on feel than facts. How many fingers am I holding up here? What's your girlfriend's name? Basically, you waited until the athlete was symptom-free, no headaches, if they were really honest with telling you that, and their primary care physician this. We would keep them out for a day and then let them return to practice. As a coach under the present system, I am much more comfortable relying on the post-testing and the re-entry protocol to aid in determining when an athlete is ready to compete or not. No real amount of thought was put into how severe the concussion was in the past, just when they could play. Second impact syndrome was not in our thoughts at all. Now we know that a second blow to the head while recovering from the first concussion is dangerous. It takes a lot less force to re-injure that brain. This testing is very important because it reveals the second impact syndrome, which is catastrophic and even fatal. The testing establishes when it is safe for the athlete to return to play, but there is no real standard recovery time. Our district initiated this testing in 2006. There was a question by parents of our student athletes as to why we were doing this, and it would be restricting their playing time. No parent or athlete wants to hear that any significant amount of playing time will be missed, but as our community became more aware of the safety rationale, they have become advocates for the testing, knowing their child's concussion will be managed properly. Another aspect of our testing has been to educate our classroom teachers. The student athlete that is concussed can have serious cognitive difficulties that will impact their classroom learning. Oftentimes, there's not been communication between athletics and academics regarding how an athletic injury can affect classroom achievement. The student that is now quiet, listless, having headaches, dizzy, not responsive, can have a legitimate medical reason due to being concussed, and academic aid can be used to address this. To personalize concussion management even more this past season, my starting tailback became concussed. The district, parents, medical staff followed the protocol outlined in Impact. All felt that he was ready, was well on his way to recovery to play again this season. That was until he reached phase 4 of the reentry protocol, that being non-contact skill drills that are sports specific, where he was having headaches. Again, following protocol, he had to retrace his recovery steps. He did not return this season as an active player. He did, though, fully recover, start on our basketball team, competitively lift during our football off season, is now enjoying a good track season. He will be ready for this fall's football season, his true passion. As his coach, I did not want to lose my number one back, but most assuredly, I did want him to be healthy and safe. That was the real number one in my life and in his life. We are in a comfort zone with concussion management in our district. We have full confidence in the system. Most assuredly, as coaches, we do not want to see these injuries. But we know now that a concussed student can be properly diagnosed and managed. The student athlete will get better and will play again. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Schmutz.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Klein, members of the committee, good morning. Thank you for your leadership on this important issue on the impact of concussions on high school athletes. Athletes first, winning second. That's the foundation of our approach at American Sport Education Program. My name is Jim Schmutz, and I'm the Executive Director of ASEP. We have been providing coach education to youth and scholastic sport coaches since 1981, and we've touched 1 million coaches in that time with our courses. Since 1990, we have joined forces with the National Federation of High Schools to develop an instructional program that is responsible for educating over 600,000 scholastic coaches in principles of coaching and sport first aid. Our primary coaching text is Successful Coaching. It's also a bestseller, recognized in the educational community and by coaches in the trenches. Clearly, the incidence and prevalence of sport-related concussions is a matter that we at ASEP feel compelled to address. In a 2009 study by Yard and Comstock, using 9 sports, they revealed that there were 395,000 concussions sustained by high school athletes nationally. This goes back to Dr. Cohn's issue about the data that's out there and the penetration of it. It's important to note that, again, this is not just a football issue, but one of the most alarming findings in the research was that 15.8% of football injuries returned more quickly 1 day after the injury, and these were grade 3 concussions, the most severe level of concussions. The authors of the study concluded that too many adolescent athletes are not adhering to those recommended return to play guidelines, and that coaches, sport medicine professionals, parents, and sports administrators must work together more effectively to ensure that athletes do follow those guidelines. The problem is that those who are most often closest to the athletes when concussions occur, of significant influence in determining their condition and a key figure in their return to action, the coaches, are seldom prepared to handle the responsibility. Coach Monticelli is a great example of what we need to accomplish. His level of preparedness provides a safe environment for his athletes. Even less frequently is a clearly defined and understood program in a place within schools' athletic departments to deal with concussion injuries. Again, I think Coach Monticelli is unique and a model for us to all look at. At the national level, ASEP works with organizations like the National Federation of High School, American Football Coaches Association, National Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association, and Impact, which is an organization that provides assessment tools and services used by medical professionals, all working with the CDC to perpetuate change at the grassroots level. And you heard from Dr. Cohn about the efforts on the part of the CDC. At the state level, state high school associations and athletic directors associations are doing similar work. The Pennsylvania State Athletic Directors Association, under the leadership of Executive Director Bob Buchanavage, has forged an alliance that can serve as a model for other states across the country by including a full range of state leaders, including school boards associations, elementary and high school, secondary school principals, and the Department of Education. Bob has engaged all key stakeholders at the high school level across the state. This includes attention to concussion as part of a broader agenda to ensure a safe and healthy environment and a meaningful high school sports experience. The best evidence of success related to concussion is the fact that they have more high schools than any other state engaged in using concussion assessment tools through their relationship with Pittsburgh-based Impact. No evidence would suggest that coaches in general are derelict in their duty to provide a safe environment for athletes. What is clear is, in the case that often less apparent, cumulative injuries like concussion, the uninformed, the untrained coach is overmatched by the role that he or she is expected to play in identifying and treating it. As Dr. Cohn pointed out, the good news is more resources exist to prevent and manage concussions today than ever before. At every turn, the CDC is connected with the organizations that I cited in partnering to address this very serious health issue. The Heads Up Concussion High School Sports that Dr. Cohn referred to is an initiative under the leadership of Kelly Sarmiento, who is in daily contact with organizations across the country and trying to help and support the proliferation of this material. It's also obviously encouraging that those materials be continued to be updated. ACEP believes that a systematic education is critical to working hard to address the need to enhance and expand concussion education by revising our sport first aid course to include more comprehensive current information on concussion management, with the intention of providing access to a full range of CDC resources. By incorporating more concussion management education into a sport first aid course, coaches in states like California, where they are required to be first aid certified, will benefit without added expense. We have a serious problem in this country and need to do better. While it is clear that there is no shortage of resources, we also know that we have a great deal of work ahead of us. We need to perpetuate a culture of athlete and safety first. We need to take advantage of the CDC and other resources in the process of formally educating coaches so that they can implement preventive measures to reduce the incidence of concussions and be better equipped to recognize and manage concussions when they do occur. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to appear here today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schwartz. Thank all of our witnesses for the testimony today. It's extremely helpful to all the members here. We're going to start on our question and answer section of this at 5-minute segments, beginning with Mr. Payne. Mr. Payne, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. Let me thank you all for coming, and in particular our young athlete. Just some questions, maybe starting with the coach. You know, the way that you've approached coaching, I think, is great. However, and I don't know whether you're the exception to the rule or the rule. I would hope that you're the rule, not the exception. However, having been involved in sports when I was young, I know that coaches tend to want to win, and that's the way it was and is today. I would even imagine that if you played ball, I assume you did, coaches used to tell you, you know, if you're injured, just keep going, you know. If you, not necessarily a concussion, but an injury, say, to an ankle or something, you know, you would almost encourage you, if you were one of, you know, the stars, that you've got to, for the team, you've got to go out there because we got to win the game. Don't let your teammates down. That's the way it was years ago when I was playing ball. Do you think that there's still much of that philosophy still going on? And I might also ask Mr. Smuts, since you've gathered information in general, in high school, do you think it's still that drive to win at all costs, Coach?
I think as New York State has evolved into coaching education classes, philosophy and principles in sports, in managing sports, we have started, we're involved in schooling our young coaches, new coaches, into or away from this idea, win at all costs, to, hey, liability is important. This young man has, or young woman has another life here besides what we think is evolved around our life, or the school's life, or the community's life. And I think that has helped a great deal in our state in making that mandatory to get that important principle of safety and liability out there. And there's more to this than the game.
In addressing your first question, I would say Coach Monticelli is closer to the exception than he is the rule. But I think it's a really good example because he absolutely puts his athletes first, and yet he's won 5 state titles. I think it really emphasizes the value of putting the athletes first, and that if you do that, winning becomes a byproduct. The reality is the philosophy with which Coach comes to practice every day and instills in his players results in their ability to come together as a team. And if we can continue to use coaches like Coach Monticelli to educate the young coaches as he described, we'll move much closer to him, other coaches being more the rule than the exception.
Just about, thank you. You know, we look at, say, the real contact sports, football, probably the one that comes to mind the most. Hockey in high school is probably, you know, less of a sport since many of the schools don't have it. But what is the danger of concussions, the problem of concussions only being sort of focused on football, but other sports, even where kids have less protection, you know, the opportunity, just like basketball, you don't think of basketball as being a sport where it can cuss. You're worried about the football team. How is that handled? Because concussions can happen in whatever sport you're playing. Smith or anyone else?
Well, I would also defer to Dr. Joy with his research, but women's soccer is a really good example of a sport where there's a high prevalence of concussions, and clearly there's no equipment there. I think, you know, from a prevention standpoint, coaching education on specific skill development and how one positions themselves to play a ball, how one positions themselves to brace physical contact. As much as soccer is a artistic sport, it is also a very physical sport. And so I think it underscores that this is not just a football issue, and that in fact education both on the skill side and teaching the proper skills, but also on recognition and prevention and management, all of that, the comprehensive piece, this has to be a holistic approach and can't be dealt in isolation.
Doctor?
Yeah, I think the other point is that, you know, certainly in our clinic and in our research, we see these injuries happening to all sports. We think about football, but really ice hockey, lacrosse, basketball, wrestling, cheerleading, gymnastics, you know, and we've already mentioned soccer. You know, these are all sports where there is either a direct collision or there is a high risk for that. And I think that the focus certainly on the education has been all sports. And if we look at what the CDC has provided in their Heads Up Toolkit, this can go to all coaches. Information about the signs and symptoms, regardless of whether, you know, you're in a sport that may not have a high incidence. It's all about understanding what the nature of that injury is, the sign, the symptom, and when in doubt, you pull them out. So I think it's important that we get that across broadly and universally.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to also commend my colleague from New Jersey for his legislation, and I'm really glad as a former coach and a former athlete to really see the attention drawn to this, because some of the fellas I played with are still suffering from concussions that you were supposed to play whether you had a concussion or not. You know, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Mr. Klein.
Thank you. I want to thank the witnesses again. Excellent testimony, and it sounds like you're all doing excellent work. Particularly want to thank Ms. Pelton for sharing her story, sharing your story. It's a compelling story. I'm going to share a short story of my own. I have a staff member who suffered a traumatic brain injury a couple of years ago now. She's a mother of two, an adult, and that injury forced her to the point where she couldn't walk, she couldn't read, she couldn't write, she couldn't drive. She really couldn't be a mother, although she was in fact a mother of two, and it made it for an interesting relationship when her emotional state was younger than her children. But she has recovered almost 100%. She can read and write and drive and function as a mother. It took a lot of work. And so I would recommend to you that you stay at it, and you too will be 100%. But it shows how in a blink of an eye a life can change with one of these concussions, one of these injuries. And to that end, Dr. Joy, I was noticing that you said that you and your staff at the Children's Medical Center spent a lot of time trying to help these student athletes cope with academic life, a school life. Can you just take a moment and kind of explain how you do that? Are you working with the teachers, or is this coaching the student athlete, or is it working through the doctors? How do you help them make that an adjustment?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Thanks for that question, because it's, Sarah can, again, probably give her personal experience, and actually does in her testimony as well. When we have kids that come into our clinic, the first thing we're doing is we're evaluating the extent of the injury, the extent of the symptoms. You know, do they reach into the cognitive area? Do they have headaches, fatigue? Are they having problems with light sensitivity or noise sounds? Are they more irritable? So we're looking at really that pattern and profile of things that are impaired. We then look at what can they tolerate based on that symptom profile. And the whole idea in concussion management is to allow recovery, but also to allow the student back into as much as they can tolerate. And that's a key point here, because when we're talking about kids and we're talking about school, we have to very carefully manage and measure what they should and should not be doing. And so part of our program is to identify what is that tolerable level up to which the symptoms do not worsen, do not exacerbate. And then based on that, we write out a care plan for every student athlete that's going back into school with very explicit, detailed instructions for the school. As Sarah knows, we go through what's first period, what's second period, what's third period. How do we build those breaks into the day? We don't want that brain to be driving itself down. We want to be sure that you're alert and capable, but when you do feel the symptoms worsen, that's when you build that break in. We need the teachers, of course, to be a part of that. So we're always looking for that individual inside the school, and the school nurses oftentimes play an important role, the school counselors, to really then work with that academic team to get the message out, to distribute that care plan, and to really work with that student to be sure that they are not overtaxing them. So it's important, again, to normalize life as much as you can, but only as much as is tolerable. And it's really that communication back and forth with the school that's critical. It's why that the new school toolkit that the CDC is just introducing today is critically important. We have to get training out to the schools. Once they understand it, then the pressure is taken off the parent and the student to have to convince them of it. It's all critically important.
Great, thank you very much. I want to shift now to the coach. In your testimony and in your responses so far, it's clear that you have achieved buy-in from the community. This is not just a question of you and your fellow coaches being more aware and having a plan and being able to deal with it, but as you said, it was kind of a hard sell for sometimes for the parents and for the community who want that championship and are questioning why the quarterback is not in the game. How do you envision that? How did you get that outreach, and what do you recommend be done to get that buy-in from the community?
Well, at the beginning, we put it on our website. All this background was given to our school health nurse, who fields an awful lot of phone calls. As athletic director, I took care of communication on some of that also. It would put on our district calendar that would go out to everybody in the district, and it would, I think, when it came to the point, regardless of our success in sports programs there, it didn't take long for them to say, well, this just isn't another test. You know, this is not a time waster. And after the second year, and we found out that it was more than just athletes that now we're testing everybody, and tried to, again, educate the community that it was more than just the athletic injury, that it could be the accident at home too. And then it wasn't just athletics, it was their cognitive ability, their ability to be a good student. Then things fell into place.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I would ask unanimous consent that instead of we keep referring to Sarah, if you'd like to come sit next to Dr. Joy, and then if you think it's appropriate to speak up on one of these answers, just elbow your way in there, and let us have the benefit of your thinking and experiences along with Michelle's. Thank you. Mr. Tierney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was timely because I do want to ask Sarah and Michelle a question. We've talked about the perspective of the coaches and the teachers and the community on that. What kind of support did you get or not get from your fellow students when you were going through this process of recovery, and what do you think that we ought to be doing to make that an easier transition? Whichever one wants to go first. Michelle, why don't you start?
Well, a lot of people did think that I was just lazy and that I was beating the system, and they didn't understand at all what I was going through. My friends, did help a lot, and my teachers, they followed the 504 plan that I was on, which gives me, extra time to do my work and everything. And I actually had one-on-one with my teachers at home, which helped a lot. That made me, pass actually my senior year. That's the only reason why I passed. And that's pretty much it.
Like Michelle said, most of the people just at our school thought that it was nothing, it was a headache, and you'd get over it. The teachers supported me a lot, but it's hard to incorporate these breaks. You either have to, take a period off or try to figure out a system that works so you can get work done and just stay in school to get your grades up. So that was a real challenge.
It was. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield to Mr. Pasquale. He's done a lot of work on this area, and I'd like to give him the opportunity early on to ask a question if he cared to.
Thank the gentleman. Appreciate that. Thank the chairman, members of the committee. Interesting, today I'm going to be meeting with the Department of Defense because we've done a lot of work with them, with our soldiers who had nothing up until 3-4 years ago. When they came back, 20% of them have suffered traumatic brain injury. God knows how many have post-traumatic stress disorder. And pay a visit to Walter Reed Hospital, and you know what I'm talking about. This is a very critical issue. There's 40% by estimates of people go back into the sport too early after they're concussed. Very dangerous situation. I've worked very closely with Congressman Todd Platts of Pennsylvania in putting the legislation together, the Contact Act, which has the endorsement of most of the major sports, NFL, because they just cleaned up their act too. When you talk to many, and Congressman Payne referred to this, many of the athletes who are, no human being is a vegetable, but they've lost everything, 40, 50 years of age. They were not attended to. Nobody took them seriously. Their teams of the league ignored them, and worse, swept it under the rug. We had a young lady in the state of New Jersey in Marlborough High School who's had 11 concussions. So she can't do any sports anymore. So we are trying in the legislation that we proposed, Todd and myself, to get some kind of a protocol, national protocol going to help coaches. We don't want the protocol to be defined by the Congress, God forbid. We want the protocol to be defined by professionals as an aid so that schools throughout the nation can get help. We've overlooked, and I'm glad the two young ladies, Sarah and Michelle, are here today, but we have overlooked injuries to large degree to the gals, girls, ladies, females, who are more vulnerable and susceptible because of the position of the brain and the vessel within the brain that covers the brain, controls the brain, secures the brain rather, because it's very different in males. And so we think that girls don't get hurt, except if they break an ankle or if there's blood. And we don't take any different of an attitude, really, as we look at our soldiers. No contusion, no blood, so we've only started to get into helping our soldiers and their families. It's a whole family operation, as it is with you. Think about your own family and what happened after you had a concussion, and they found out about it, because your parents, many of them, want you out there in the field, are just as enthusiastic, are living many times through you their own inadequacies to gain favor on the basketball court or the soccer field or the football field. Coach, I don't have to tell you how many parents have you put up with, you know, over the years. So you know exactly what we're talking about. The bill first brings together a conference of stakeholders, as I said, to establish a concussion management guideline that would prevent, identify, treat, and manage concussions. It then authorizes grants to the states for adopting, disseminating, and implementing these guidelines. Look, the federal government is probably involved in too many things. I think it has a responsibility to lead, since the states are very reluctant to do it. The 3 states that have stepped up to the plate somewhat have very different protocols, and so there's not one that they've decided on. And if I could, through the chair, ask a question to Dr. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Tierney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the panelists. It's been a really great, enlightening panel this morning. I, too, as Congressman Payne, as if you played football or participated in sports, you probably eventually got a lick on the head. I ended up in Congress. I don't know what that says about my lick on the head, but Coach, you remember, and I think the reason you've been successful is because you were successful, and people have tremendous respect for you in your community. I know that from just listening to you. When the coach that's won 5 state championships says you sit out, you sit out. And I know that what you've been able to do, because of the respect they have for you, there's tremendous pressure to win. And there's also tremendous pressure when you're an athlete. You have a very short time to play. And it's in high school, it's probably 2 or 3 years max. You're not going to play as a freshman. And there's tremendous pressure on you as an athlete and as families. So what I think you did was, and what I think is, and Dr. Goya mentioned, what's being tried to happen is to get a protocol and some evidence-based medicine. I'm a physician, and because of that, ended up being the team coach for I can't tell you, and the coach for I can't tell you how many different teams through elementary school and high school. So I think you have to educate the personnel, the coaches, and nobody rewards you when you lose. And that's a big pressure on the coaches and the families too. And the other coach on young men is that, you know, you got to play hurt if you play football. You're going to get banged up and you're going to play hurt. So I think educating the coaches, educating the athlete that you can't be playing, and then the family and the community, as Congressman Klein mentioned, I think is imperative. So I think having a program in communities through the school board or whatever to educate, coaching clinics that you go to, is that how you were? I heard a little bit about how you did that. Is that how you all accomplished that in your community? Was it coaching?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that question.
Coaching clinics that's how you, or it's been kind of a transition, it sounds like, in your community.
Yes, I mean, this is, in the coaching world, this has been the buzzword.
Okay.
You know, there's still some of us dinosaurs out there, and that understand both sides of this, and now really more understand the injury side. And we're trying to educate those younger ones coming through, and this is becoming more at the athletic directors conferences and the coaching conferences. This is becoming the workshop topics.
Well, nobody ever got better academically but gotten a lick to the head. I totally agree with that. When these students come in, Dr. Goya, to your clinic, and do you all evaluate them with MRI, CT, psychological test? How are they evaluated?
Many of the kids have had either typically CT, maybe MRI as a screening, but what we know is that conventional neuroimaging methods of CT and MRI tell us about the hardware of the brain, and we use that mostly to rule out more catastrophic problems. Research now is looking at some of the more advanced neuroimaging that allows us to look at the software systems, but the bottom line is those are experimental research methods right now. So what we do is we look at their neuropsychological functioning, their neurocognitive functioning. We do very specific symptom-based assessments. We ask parents and the student athlete to tell us about those, so that we use a set of information to basically look at that profile. The cognitive testing that we use is similar to what Coach Monticelli's using, the Impact software, and there's a variety of ones out there. The bottom line is we need both objective and good measurable tools in order to look at that level of, well, first impairment and then the level of recovery, and to guide that along the way. The other thing, of course, and you'll know this as much as anybody on the panel, is that the relationship with the family and that patient is critical. And to understand the nature of the sports injury is critical in the athlete. It is very difficult for them to be sitting out. And quite honestly, when I was playing high school football and wrestling and all those good sports, my main focus was being on the field. I think it's where we also have to bring perspective to the responsible caretakers, the parents, the coaches, the teachers. But at the same time, we also get a message across to the teammates. A teammate that sees their friend impaired and who has knowledge now about the dangers of this injury really has responsibility for helping that teammate get off the field, letting the coach know you're not snitching on your teammate, you're actually responsible for their health. They may not be able to make that decision on the field. So there's a variety of places where we really need to get that message across, and the relationship is very important.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I thank you for your testimony. It certainly is a subject that we should be definitely doing something about, and I want to thank again my colleague from New Jersey for the work that he's done on TBI. One of the things that I've been working on for a number of years is making sure, or hoping to make sure, that we have school nurses in all schools. When I started looking at the issue, some schools have one nurse for 5,000 to 7,000 students, which is totally unacceptable. But with that being said, we know that some schools have school nurses, they have athletic trainers as far as picking up these symptoms. But I think the most important thing for why you're all here, and certainly there's a number of pieces of legislation to work on that. What would you all like to see as far as what we need to do to certainly make it more aware and to help you and certainly the coach, the doctors, the students, to make this certainly as safe as possible? What would you want us to do?
Well, currently what I've been doing is I've been going to 2 of my classes, and then I've been taking a nap at the nurse's office during the 3rd class, and then trying to make it to my 4th. Sometimes I've had to leave early, but I mean, having my school nurse there has really been a help for me in my situation. So.
Again, I think really first of all, having the committee recognize this problem, at the youth level is critical. We always show the triangle, and we talk about the elite athlete at the very tip of that triangle, and really the youth are at the majority of that triangle. We really have to work to put kind of universal education and management programs in our schools, but I think it's important to recognize this is not simply a high school problem. It's also a youth sport below the high school level as well. And in fact, one might argue that that's even less sort of structured around that. I think what we need to do is to build some good coalitions together. And I think certainly, with the leadership of Congressman Pascrell and Platts, and looking nationally at this problem, but also looking at the state level, I think our individual states need to understand how can we put in place these education of all stakeholders, including the school personnel, not just the coaches, parents, student athletes, officials, but the school personnel, because that will be where the kids spend most of their recovery time, not on the fields. And in doing so, looking at the collaborative efforts that are going on right now, the American College of Sports Medicine, together with the Sarah Jane Brain Foundation, a number of the national governing bodies of sports are looking at this together. How do we really build those coalitions? But the other problem is that we don't have all of those personnel in place. I think each state needs to look at what are their resources that will allow us to build that proper team to both identify the problem and to manage it properly, so that child goes back onto the field when they're ready, and that their education is managed properly. So looking at that team, in the school, in the medical community. We truly don't yet understand this injury entirely. I mean, when I'm managing this in the clinic, I'm using my best available knowledge. We really need more research on these issues. We know that an injury to that 6-year-old is very different than the 11-year-old and the 16-year-old. What we're hearing and what we're believing is that the difference between boys and girls may be really substantial. And then we also know that kids that come into sports with other kinds of developmental or neurological disabilities, so an ADHD, learning disabilities, that's a different brain, and the response to that injury is different. But we don't entirely know how that plays out individually. So we've got to understand this research-wise and put that into evidence-based practice. And again, I think Dr. Cohn's slide was really important. It shows the community of individuals that really deal with this injury. It's not just medical, it's not just the coaches, it's the entire school, medical, athletic systems together. So I think if the committee can see, what is that, what is a universal plan that can really coordinate nationally, but also look at individual adaptations per state. Certainly we've tried to articulate some of that in our PABI plan as a start, and I certainly would like the committee to give that some serious consideration. But then looking at what are the resources that we need to then bring together the people to put this in place. And I know, Congressman Pascrell, you've talked about how can we then convene the professionals. Certainly the CDC has been an important champion for this, and the guidelines in bringing together the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Neurology, is something they're trying to pull together as well. So it's a big problem with many different facets, but if we can at least begin to bring the coalitions together and really think about what's that first roadmap for implementation, we'll be much further along the way than we were last year. Big task.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd be delighted to yield some of my time to Sarah so she can tell us her story, if you're willing, Sarah.
Well, I was playing on the right side, and a ball was flighted over, and I was running after it.
What was your sport?
Soccer.
Okay.
When a defender on the other team blindsided me from my left side and drove through the side of my head, and I was knocked unconscious for a couple of seconds. Later, a trainer helped me off the field. I got a drink of water, and the coach put me back in for the remaining 2 minutes of the game and overtime.
And the results?
When I got in the car, I was having massive headaches, throbbing, and I told my dad, and we went to the emergency room later that night. And I stayed home the next day, and I didn't return to school until I think Thursday, and this happened on a Monday. And school has continued to be a challenge, and I haven't returned to any physical activity so far.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
And thank you to Ms. Pelton. Thank you very much. I want to talk about the parents' involvement in all of this, how difficult this must be for coaches and doctors, et cetera, because parents get really, really involved in their kids' sports activities. I am the mother of a son who graduated college and was All-American football player for his junior and senior year. And when he graduated, he came home and he said, "Mother, I want to take you for a walk." Okay, he was a defensive guard, so he's a big guy. Okay. He said, "I'm through with football, and I want you to get over it." Okay. But that's, we were so supportive of him, and he knew, and he'd not been hurt, and he said, "My knees are good, my feet are good, I want to go on and have a different life." I believe that parents play a big role in this. In my district, I represent Marin County, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge, and in March, a high school student in Marin was hit in the head by a baseball that was hit off a metal bat. And thankfully, he's recovering, but he spent weeks in the hospital in a coma. And his injury spurred the debate in the league about whether or not metal bats are appropriate. Well, it was the parents in the other districts in this league that absolutely insisted that metal bats continue to be used because they did not want their students to be, their kids to be disadvantaged. Marin County is not going to use metal bats and are willing to take the consequences. But parents, you know, they need to learn, and what you're here and your voices and the student voices, because not all parents are as wonderful as your parents are. So be very thankful for that. So I just wanted to point that out. Parents need to be part of this, and they need to be educated. I do have a couple questions. One question I have of Dr. Goya is, can a student who's been appropriately treated recover 100%, or will they be vulnerable for the rest of their life?
You know, every injury is different, but you know, both through our clinical experience and the research to date shows that most students do, if managed properly, identified early and managed properly, do recover to their full capacity. But there are some caveats in there. Again, what we know is that you've had multiple injuries that have been repeated, that have not been managed or identified. There can be a cumulative effect. And so, but certainly in the kids that we have seen where it's been a single, what we call uncomplicated injury, meaning that they're on a variety of other complicating medical factors, their recovery is actually quite good when given the proper time and managed individually.
Okay, thank you. Coach, I have a question for you. First of all, I want to tell you I think you're great. My question to you, is what do you do for prevention? I mean, I'm going to assume that your athletes are as fit as they can possibly be, because does that not make a difference in prevention in the first place?
Well, in the part of the scheme of thing, yes, fitness is. In practice, you try to match up body sizes when you're in drills. But when the game comes, it's different. And that's where, you know, your other players, as you mentioned, somebody mentioned, they recognize that something's not right in the huddle. Your athletic trainer is there, and then the process starts, you know. We're, as coaches, we're trying to do as much as we can. And you know, it's good that it's good she's here, but not good she's here that we're looking at female athletes too, because we're all looking at bigger, faster, stronger here, and it's both genders. And so, you know, the process is out there to educate, say, the parents, the students, to the fact that no, they're not laying off this practice or these drills, and they're not relaxing here, and same thing with the coachings too. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This really is an important hearing, and I'm really glad to be here and to listen to and read the testimony of all of you, especially Sarah Michelle. Thank you. It takes a lot of courage to come to a place like this and to offer your testimony. I do want to thank my colleague, Mr. Pasquale. He's been working so hard on TBI issues. I'm on the Armed Services Committee and been overseas to Afghanistan and Iraq and the Longeville Regional Medical Center, and done a lot with the VA hospital in Iowa City. TBI is such a huge issue for our military, but putting what you're talking about today into that larger context of TBI, I think, is really absolutely critical, because this is a part of a much larger problem. And again, I want to thank Congressman Pasquale for being here today as well and participating in this. I like the focus on community, Doctor. I think we have to do that with respect to so many aspects of education and athletics. We don't do enough of it, and especially the awareness part of it. Also, I think whatever we do, does is, I think everybody here agrees, it has to be evidence-based. And I noticed on page 3 of your testimony that we really don't still have a handle on the exact scope of this problem because we don't know the incidence of concussion in every sport. How do we do better, first of all, at identifying the problem?
Well, it's got to be at multiple tiers, but the bottom line is by making sure that we educate people at all levels, parents, coaches, kids, medical professionals, school professionals, so they have the awareness and the knowledge, number one. But we have to put a reporting system in place that really captures that information. Again, the good work that's been done at Nationwide Children's by Dawn Comstock and her group is very good data, except what we know is that data reported only to the athletic trainer is, again, another tip of the iceberg. When we ask athletes after the season when their threat is gone for losing time, and or we ask them a different question rather than did you have a concussion, instead we start to articulate what that means, we see much higher rates. So we've got to find and develop, and we can do this, data systems and data capture systems that really look at the reality of the problem, and in ways that you know, are collaborative. I know athletes feel threatened at times, but again, if they understand the nature of the problem, we hope that they'll be on board a bit more with us. That's a tall task, but I think it's an attainable task, and it's going to be different than the more narrow-based approaches that we have right now. I mean, certainly being in this field, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't see a friend and I hear about their child or, you know, their friend's, you know, concussion. And most of those weren't reported along the way. So we know that we have to have a different system.
In some ways, it's not unlike trying to determine just how prevalent TBI is among our veterans, and trying to screen as best we can, obviously, for TBI there. But to me, just finding the incidence and getting the actual accurate data for just how many athletes in particular sports and in the aggregate actually suffer concussions. We have to have those data in the first place before we can deal with the issue, it seems to me. And I want to go back to prevention. Congresswoman Woolsey mentioned that. Obviously, the only way that we can prevent concussions in athletes is not to have contact sports, but that's not going to happen. None of us would like to see that happen, I don't think. We'd like to see sports continue. They're wonderful for a variety of reasons, but can any of you, and Coach, if you'd like to speak just a little bit more, you didn't have a lot of time to answer Congresswoman Woolsey's question, but how do we prevent this from happening in the first place, and anyone else who might like to weigh in on this?
Well, it's tough. You know, you as much safety procedures that you have in place on the practice field, on the game field. Again, I go back to it. Athletes are, those young men and women are competitors, and they want to play, and they want to get at it. Excuse the expression, but they want to play the game, you know, and they're going to play it hard, whether it's male or female, and sadly these things happen, just like the sprained ankle or the blown knee. The issue is now we are now recognizing this. It's so easy to recognize the blown knee and the broken ankle or whatever, but it's not. It has never been very easy, and still isn't, to recognize this internal injury. So prevention, education is the preventive tool. Safety equipment is a preventive tool. Safe practices in practice and games is prevention, but that's no panacea for the possibility that's going to happen.
Yeah, there's a big focus right now on a number of those levels that the coach mentioned. Many of the national governing bodies are looking at their sport. How can we address the coaching technique? So in football, again, we use that, but in hockey, in lacrosse, in soccer, and how do we also reinforce the rule enforcement around those rules? Are there particular aspects of sports where we need to modify the game? We know that some of the most catastrophic injuries in football happen on the kickoff. Is there something we need to do to modify that? Then is there equipment that can be protective? We know that's not the whole answer. A lot of people say, if I only had a better helmet. Well, no, the helmet is going to absorb some force, and more technology is being developed to absorb that force to an even greater extent than the foam that we previously had used. But we know that that's only part of the answer there as well. The good news is that many of the national governing bodies, and literally this past Tuesday, met with a group, our collaborative sports medicine group, to look at what's the next steps we take with our organizations at all of those levels.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Gioa, is that right? Thank you. I was surprised to see that according to a study by Dr. Luke Gessel published in the Journal of Athletic Training, the sport that with the highest, second highest number and percentage of student concussions was girls soccer, and second only to boys football. Do you have any concern? Are there any concerns that girls and boys may react differently to head trauma? And is there any research in this area?
This has been a topic of discussion and research as well. What we see when we pair together similar sports, girls soccer, boys soccer, we look at baseball, softball, and basketball. Those are our three closest sports. When we look at lacrosse, the game is played different. When we look at hockey, it's a little bit different. There are similarities, but there are a lot of differences. What we see is there tends to be a relatively higher incidence of the injury in the girls' sport. What we're trying to understand is why that is. This is a biomechanical injury. Now, it may be that there's something about the brain that doesn't take that force as well in the girl. It may also be that the neck is different, so that the head, when it's taking that force, is not buffering it through the whole body because it's not as solidly attached, so to speak. And so there may be a variety of factors. Some say maybe the girls are reporting the injuries more so. I can tell you that at the upper levels, and my own daughters played upper level lacrosse, they will lie just as simply and easily as the boys will. So I'm not entirely sure that's the simple answer, but it may be a combination of factors. So yes, there seem to be differences. We don't quite understand what's behind those differences. We need to understand that further with more research. And again, I'll also throw the age factor in there too. We need to understand why younger kids are taking longer to recover than than college and professionals.
And then are you concerned about the potential for head trauma from repeated concussive blows?
Oh, absolutely. I know Dr. Cantu and the group in Boston has been talking about that. Again, this is where our research is going to come in. If we can put in place some of the things that are happening in helmeted sports where we have accelerometers that can start to look at the extent, magnitude, and direction of that force to the head and look to see, are those producing concussions? And again, that goes back then, is there a different way to coach the game that may reduce the amount of that subconcussive blow?
Well, in one of my former lives, I was an assistant soccer coach for girls and teaching them to do the header. Is that something that should be avoided? And I heard that it was bad, so we stopped doing it. But I mean, except for very,
Yeah, the data actually has not shown that purposeful heading is the reason for concussions in most kids. Now, there's always exceptions. Why is that? Purposeful heading is when you are preparing the body now for that blow. And again, it's all about distributing that force biomechanically through the body. When the head is hit by an errant soccer ball or you're not prepared for it, that's when we see the injuries. And again, it's a different biomechanical load on the brain at that time.
Right. Well, then in my district, we've done some preliminary research, or have seen some research on treating returning veterans with TBI in hyperbaric chambers, and also looking at even autistic children. Do you see any potential for eventually treating athletic traumas in this way?
You know, the whole area of treatment, we're really on the forefront right now. It's just beginning. And so part of the issue here is we need to understand what is happening to the software of that brain to then look at what are the treatments we want to put in place. My colleagues at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, and their Brain Injury Research Center are using very interesting models of research in looking at this problem. We are starting a software imaging study where we can look at what are the chemical changes. That then will allow us to say what are either the medicines or the other kinds of treatments that we want to put in place acutely.
Have you seen the hyperbaric?
I've seen that. I have not. It's not yet been obviously applied to the sports or to kids all that much.
Okay, thank you. And if I've got one more time, Dr. Cohn. In your view, how successful have the state laws in Washington and Texas and Oregon and Virginia been at educating teachers and coaches and parents in how to identify and treat concussion?
All three state laws were passed relatively recently. The oldest one is Texas, which was passed in 2007, has been in place for 3 school years. Washington and Oregon laws were passed in 2009. The Washington law was implemented for just the school year that's ending. Oregon is not in place yet. So they're all really relatively newly implemented, and we were not aware of evaluations yet that had been done.
Okay, so you wouldn't know which provisions have the greatest possible effect yet, but
we're not. We don't know of the evaluations that have been done on them yet. They're all really quite new.
right, great. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the panel for their excellent testimony this morning. I've heard from a lot of different perspectives, all of them very valuable. Thank you. Dr. Cohn, is it Cohn or Kahn? I'm sorry.
Cohn, but I'll answer to any.
Okay, Dr. Cohn. Thank you for the excellent work that you and your colleagues at GAO do. I understand there are 3 national databases that exist that you took a look at. Is that right?
That's right.
And the conclusion that you drew is that you really can't draw any conclusions from the databases about the incidence of concussions among high school athletes. Is that right?
Correct.
What could those databases do that would permit us to have more robust data so we could draw some conclusions? What's missing?
The database that's most targeted to the population of interest here, high school athletes, is the database out of Columbus, Ohio, that I referenced earlier. That database has produced the incidence numbers that have been widely cited, and it's only based on 9 sports. Over time, since those studies have been done, as recent as they are, more sports have been added to the database. So they now cover 20 sports. So that's a growing expansion of the coverage of sports that we have information on. The databases, all 3 of them, also have information on the circumstances under which the injury occurred.
I assume that you would agree that the more data we have, the more effective we can be at diagnosing the causes and eventually treatments. Is that correct? You want more robust data?
More information on the circumstances under which the injury occurred can provide actionable information to develop and target programs.
Do you have any suggestions as to things Congress might do to encourage or facilitate the gathering of more meaningful data?
At the current time, CDC does support a couple of the databases. The one at Columbus has received federal support, as does the one at Consumer Product Safety Commission.
So it would be more a matter of the CDC continuing that support, perhaps doing a bit more with it. Who maintains the database in Columbus? Who's the sponsor or keeper of it?
It is at the Nationwide Children's Hospital. It's a private effort with public support.
Okay. And are the data that are in that database publicly available for researchers to take a look at?
It is not a searchable database at the moment. It is not available to the public. The researchers aggregate information. They publish it in peer-reviewed journals, but it is not available to researchers. The database at Consumer Product Safety Commission is a public searchable database.
Now, Coach, thank you for the leadership role you've taken in protecting your athletes, educating your athletes, and your peers as well. What tools do you think a coach needs to be sure that he or she can make the maximum effort that you've made? What are the critical pieces to a successful education, prevention, and treatment program in this area?
In New York State, we mandate that they have to take the coaching courses, philosophy and principles and so on, which starts getting into just what it is, philosophy. It's not just winning, it's participation and all the good things that go along with that. That's critical. Also, good leadership within your own district. You know, we're looking at where can the government help, and we only have 3 states really on board. Each state really, and then trickle down from that. The states and the local districts have to get on board to make this mandatory. This is important.
What are the actual tools needed, though? For instance, do you need access to, let me ask you this question. Do you have a team physician that works with you?
We're a small district. We have a better situation than some small districts. We have an athletic trainer on site for all collision sports, but not every sport. It's not softball or baseball where something can happen.
Is that a paid school district employee, that trainer?
Pardon?
Is the school district paying the trainer?
Yes.
Is that an employee?
Yes.
Is that typical in your part of New York or atypical?
Not typical. Depends on finances.
Yeah. Do you, can you describe to us what the risks are if a trained athletic trainer is not present? Practical doctor, you'd like to join in that too. You know, what if a kid has a head injury during a game? What kind of things does a trainer do right on spot to deal with the problem?
Well, now it goes back to when I coached without medical personnel, and we're talking athletic trainer, not the local physician too. And the local physician they have their expertise too, but athletic injuries is a different wrinkle, and to have someone trained in athletic injuries and diagnosing those on the spot, it makes safety a heck of a lot easier for us.
I see my time's up, but if Doctor, you'd like to briefly answer the question.
Congressman Andrews, you're hitting on an important point here. Only 42% of the high schools in the United States have certified athletic trainers. They are our immediate athletic health professional that identifies and diagnoses that injury. They are critical. They're critical at the high school level. They're critical at the youth level.
How are they critical medically? What difference? What kind of things can a trainer do right on spot when the athlete gets hurt that could make a big difference?
They're doing active medical evaluation of that injury. You know, when somebody goes down, there are many, many possibilities they could be. Some of them could be life-threatening. Some could be, permanently impairing, like a spinal cord injury. They're doing very important early diagnoses of the capacity to breathe, to move, blood circulation, the important things there, and then they go through their checklist. They are life-saving individuals in addition to disability-reducing individuals as well. Critically important.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of you for being here. I wanted to ask you about school-based health centers. There were 2 provisions in the health care bill that relate to this, and I wonder whether you have had a chance to look and see whether they play any role at all, whether schools that have school-based health centers do a better job educationally, do a better job in follow-up, and just generally, I think, trying to disseminate better information for students about injuries that they receive.
You're asking, yes.
Sure.
I will say that the most interested group that I've worked with in the school system are the school nurses and the school health professionals. So we have health aides in Maryland as well. And I think they're a central place where both they identify an injury that could happen in the school, a child falling, but also they are the place that receives the information and disseminates that then to the teachers. So I'll be quite honest with you that I'm not as familiar with the health center concept, but I can tell you that the individuals that populate those centers, I'm sure, are critical folks, and they have been our greatest advocates as we then go from the kids back to the schools, making sure they get those care plans, they understand that. And again, the nice thing about the new school toolkit is it has very specific tools, assessment tools, monitoring of symptoms, management strategies that they can reinforce in the school. So I think putting those into the health center concept will really be quite useful in helping kids return to school.
Coach, I don't know whether any of you have any experience with school-based centers, whether that's provides a model in schools, and certainly at the state level, looking at that issue that might be helpful.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
The school-based health centers that are located on school grounds, particularly in high schools. You're not familiar with
Again, with being
okay.
a small district, we're
right.
very fortunate to have an athletic trainer,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, okay. One of the things that I think is very positive about that is really the education piece, and that's part of the concern, I think, is that we know that the incidence of reporting perhaps isn't as high as it should be, and that, you know, for whatever reason, because kids don't want to say anything, they don't recognize the symptoms. I don't know whether there's any disparity in terms of gender, and whether the fact that you have more women who seem to be affected by these injuries, whether reporting is any different, a higher incidence, and recognizing symptoms. I don't know if that's an issue. I wanted to just go to it for a second, though. I think in Congressman Pascrell's legislation that is being thought through, one of the issue is about having a baseline in order to determine the extent of an injury and what's going on, you know, with a youngster after perhaps a fall or an injury, whatever. And I know that we're struggling in the Armed Services Committee, actually, on traumatic brain injury, and there's some controversy over whether there is a good baseline tool to determine that. Do you think that that's an area that there's a lot of promise in terms of high school injuries? Would it be that every person playing sports would have some basic tests to determine kind of their baseline so that you have something to go on later on? How do you see that coming together?
Well, I know that Coach Monticelli is doing that, and we're doing baseline testing in a variety of school systems around the Baltimore-Washington area. In the ideal, having a baseline in every student athlete would be very useful. There are some challenges, though, both logistically and the tools that we're using are not perfect. And one of the things that we have to respect is that it may be a challenge to get, and we're doing this actually in the Howard County school systems here in Maryland this year. We're going to have all of our high school athletes, with the exception of very few sports, baselined, but we have to start that early because of the crush of fall sports. It's a challenge. The personnel that are available are limited. If you have a school without a certified athletic trainer, it's going to be hard to do that. You also need doctors who are familiar with the interpretation of that information as well. So you've got to build a resource system around that, as well as a logistical process. And then we also have to recognize that these aren't perfect measures, and that's where the clinician...
Is there an element of self-reporting that you think is helpful on the part of the students to be able to fill out questionnaires? And I understand that is definitely not a perfect tool, but yeah. I wonder to the extent that schools are actually doing that and trying to ascertain the extent to which students have headaches.
Yeah, I mean, that part of the baseline test is actually a baseline symptom report as well. What are the normal degree of headache in that individual, concentration problems, and that sort of thing. So that's an important part to know ahead of time. So the concept, I think, is an important one. Its implementation is going to be a challenge, and we need to think about the resources to do that.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. If I might, Dr. Joy and Sarah and Michelle, it seems that the aftermath of this, of a serious concussion incident, is somewhat of an isolating event for young people. You're thrown out of your normal schedule, you're thrown out of your normal activities, and you're kind of on your own to navigate this the best you can. And whether or not you have access to a knowledgeable doctor or medical personnel would be very important in that. And I just wondered, are there discussions, and maybe Mr. Schmutz, you can come in, are there efforts to try to provide some support groups in a region or an area for young people who are going through this? Because it challenges many of your own self-concepts about where you thought you were going with your future. In your case, going to college to play softball, Michelle, and this was the sport you loved, and all of a sudden all that's kind of brought to an abrupt halt. And I just wondered how we deal with that, or are there examples of dealing with that side of it?
You know, one of the groups that we have not mentioned, and we are remiss in doing this, are the brain injury associations in each of the states. They play really important roles and are truly the advocating organizations for families and for kids and for individuals that have had the brain injuries, and many times they'll provide those kind of support structures. But I also think that if in their collaboration with school systems, if we think about whether that is a place where some of this education would happen, some of that support, if you will, would happen, that would be a good collaboration, brain injury associations and school systems. But I think it's important, you know, this, and I would actually leave it to Michelle.
Michelle, or, I mean, who do you
there's-
turn to? Your mother and your stepfather are here, and Sarah, your family, but this is kind of a tough discussion because it's a limitation on what your normal activities are. You said your friends supported you. I just wondered if you think there should be other support systems in place.
Yeah, there should be. There was a girl from my high school that got a concussion from, it wasn't sport related, however, but I did sit down and talk with her and everything, and she found it helpful because I could understand what she was going through. And you know, there's in my dugout where I played softball for several years, there's going to be a sign up for in the dugouts for signs and symptoms of a concussion, where, you know, coaches will know when to take the kid out of the game.
Thank you. Sarah?
I think it goes back to the awareness part. I mean, it's hard because the teachers before I got a concussion, I didn't know what a concussion was or stuff like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Ms. Schmetz?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with support groups, but I think it underscores the point of a holistic approach as it relates to the education. You know, I had an experience where, similar to some of these experiences, where a friend of mine's son, 10-year-old hockey player, comes off the ice, takes his helmet off. Coach, he's the best player on the team. Coach says, "Michael, can you put your helmet on and go back in the game?" 10-year-old kid does not really know how to say no to the coach, but needs to understand how to articulate to the coach, "I can't go back in, coach," so he doesn't expose himself. And I think the holistic piece as it relates to parents, even and athletes understanding. Now, if they haven't experienced it, they don't know what it feels like. It is an invisible injury, as it's been told. There's no cast to sign. There's no blood. There's none of that. But to the extent that we can help dispel some of the ignorance, I think that can lead to some of these support systems being better positioned to support athletes who go through this experience.
Thank you. Ms. Cohn, when you listen to the cross-section of testimony here and the information you've given us, are there gaps that are still missing after we listen to the recommendations and suggestions here that we should be paying attention to?
Certainly the information in terms of the circumstances under which the injuries occur that can provide actionable information. So the number is important, but also just having more information to be able to take action. Action doesn't have to wait for any particular number to be developed. And also the other part of the federal role at the present time is the education that is in place from CDC, and I heard that today in terms of the education and the convening function that CDC is also performing, and that also seems to be, based on the other comments here today, that convening function seems to be very important as well.
Thank you. Coach Maselli, I played 4 years of varsity football in high school, and I played 3 years on a team where all we were told to be was tough, and we never won a varsity game. And I played 1 year on a team that was #1 year after year after year in Northern California, and all they told us to be was smart. And we never had any. We only had 1 day of contact, or half a practice of contact on the smart team, and on the other team, all we did was just run into one another head first, day after day after day. Practice is a big part of this problem, I would assume also, because people are trying to challenge one another for a position, a starting position, what have you. And in the testimony, it's mentioned different times, but that would seem to me that there's an awful lot of opportunity in practice to suffer these concussions. And if people want to comment.
That's why, as a coach, you try to match up body sizes when there is one-on-one drills and things like that. But it's not like wrestling where it's more matchups are easier there. You have that 160-pounder going against that 260, and a lot of occasions, especially in game situations versus even team drills. One-on-one drills you control, two-on-two drills you can control, but the bigger arena you can't. So that's where you encourage the off-season conditioning. That's where you spend time as a coach making sure you as head coach and your assistants are well aware of the situations that can put an athlete in jeopardy. And then when you suspect, because of your background in it, when you suspect, you get them out of there and to start a medical protocol to double check this. And hopefully it's not happening, but in some sports, you just can't get away from true safe issues with this, other than educate everybody involved.
Thank you. Mr. Schmutz, in your testimony, your written testimony, you really lay out that we really have a lot of opportunities for the education to take place in organized youth sports and school sports and the rest of this. I mean, if there was ever an issue that jumps at the name of this committee, education, it clearly can have a huge impact. I mean, I always believe we've solved most of the difficult problems in our society through education, and this is one where it's clear we have so many places of entry around the involvement of these activities that it really is a rich ground for education, and where people's interest, their self-interest and the alignment of education kind of go together, whether they're a referee or a coach or a player or a parent or a principal of a school or a school board or what have you, that it all sort of is aligned, that this knowledge is really in your best interest to acquire. And it sounds like people are, through the various organizations, they're responding.
They are responding. I think Dr. Joya referred to some of the national governing bodies. I think the key here is to continue the momentum. Clearly, we've come a long way in the last couple of years, but there's a long way to go on the youth level in particular. You've got volunteer coaches, demanding more time of a parent coach to go to another meeting. Dr. Joya and I were talking earlier, and he talked about a meeting he had with Montgomery Youth Hockey where he asked for 15 minutes and nobody left the room for more than an hour. So I think it's a matter of getting people to actually commit. That's where, at a local, a team level, that particular meeting was required for those coaches to go. It takes somebody with the courage to require somebody and not be concerned with somebody who might say, well, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to walk away. If their kid wants to participate, somebody's going to step up. I think we need to be hold these volunteer coaches as well as high school coaches more accountable to take part in the education process. The resources are there. The need is to penetrate more.
Anyone else? Yeah, Dr. Jordan.
We just mentioned that, I think, again, the examples of Coach Monticelli showing that he has a safe program and a successful program are really what we need to highlight, that using safe coaching practices, using the best available equipment, having knowledgeable people that can identify the injury, all of that together still produces 5 championships, state championships, and in that little state of New York, that's not a small task. That's quite a feat, having been a New Yorker myself. And so, I think that's what we have to get across. This does not compromise the game,
Right.
but you can still be safe.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. Dr. Cohn, for your research. And I know we've got a lot more to look at. We've got a limited number of states, but I very much appreciate your input today and your work. And I'm sure we'll be coming back to you for for more work. And to Coach, again, congratulations. Congratulations on having winning season after winning season, but really stepping up to recognize the problem and get the community involvement as well as the coach involvement. Dr. Smuts, again, thanks for everything that you're doing. And I think what I'm hearing from all of you, and certainly including Dr. Joya, is that in order for this to work, you have to have Dr. Cohn's diagram work where you have everybody. And it's not something that can be mandated or dictated. You've got to get to the parents, and you've got to get to the coaches, and you've got to get to the school nurse and the teachers and the students. And that takes work and outreach. And so, again, congratulations to you, Coach, for being successful in doing that. We need to see that everywhere if we're going to really have that awareness, as Dr. Joya said, that you can have the winning season. Well, maybe you have to have Coach Monselli to have those winning seasons, but you can have winning seasons and still address this urgent need. And again, mostly to Sarah and Michelle, God bless you. Thanks for coming today and for telling us your story. We certainly hope that you have every success in going forward in recovery. I know that it's very, very difficult. I told the story of the woman who's on my staff, and it was a long road and not a straight path. But you just have to stay with it, and I'm sure you've got the love and support of your parents and an increasing awareness of your peers and the people around you. You're going to make it. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. I'd like to associate myself with the closing remarks of Congressman Klein. And again, thank all of you for being here. And to Sarah and Michelle, thank you again on behalf of all of the members of the committee. And we look forward to working with you. We think Mr. Pasquarel has a pretty good idea here, but we need some help in fleshing out the details. So thank you very much. Without objection, members will have 14 days to submit additional materials or questions for the hearing record. Some members may want to submit written questions to you. If you could answer them, we would deeply appreciate it. And with that, the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you.